It's Chris and Steve with the mic in hand, digging through truths that don't quite land.
Here we go.
There we go.
Bits and pieces that didn't get said, from the pulpit to the podcast instead. Not for Sunday mornings, no halos.
This is the one we settled on, huh?
Yeah, I like it.
I like it. Not bad. Not bad.
They got a vote this week.
Huh?
They got a vote this week.
They did?
Yeah. Welcome to the It's my favorite part.
Grab your coffee.
We don't even drink
You don't
coffee.
even drink coffee.
I know. But yeah, welcome to Not for Sunday Mornings. My name is Steve, and I am with
Chris.
And this week, Chris got to prepare the sermon, and it was awesome. And I've got some thoughts, some questions, and we're gonna have some fun along the way. But before we do that, I have a surprise for you.
Yeah.
I got a letter from some friends. I'm gonna share it with you, and a gift.
Okay.
Here we go. I got this card, and it says, Pastor Steve, something small to show we appreciate the time and effort with the podcast. We do enjoy and learn a different perspective of the Bible verses. 2 of your subscribers, Bob and Lisa Hansen. And you know what Bob and Lisa gave me? A gift card to Fleckenstein's. So, because I love you very much, I went and bought a dozen donuts for us. Look at that.
That's beautiful.
Well, today's episode is brought to you by Fleckenstein's and Bob and Lisa.
Not really, though. They're
Not really?
They're not subscribing. They're not. Fleckenstein's is not sponsoring us.
But they do make good donuts, and I'm gonna have one.
They do, and they've been around. Like, I know they're not a sponsor, but they've been around forever. They made my first birthday cake.
Wow, that's a long time ago.
Yeah, many years ago. Well, full disclosure, they also did give me a card as well, and so,
so
you were out of town, and so you didn't know.
Wait, so you got a card from Bob and Lisa too?
I did, yeah.
With a gift card?
Yeah, they're so great.
And so you selfishly held on to yours, but I spent it and bought donuts for us. Okay, yeah.
I haven't. It's been sitting.
Yeah.
It is.
Sure.
It's,
Yeah, he's already used it by himself.
I have not used it. We were actually out of town too, so.
I bought us a dozen donuts. Well,
I appreciate that.
I didn't buy it.
No, Bob and Lisa did, and we they said knowledge nuggets, and donuts are my knowledge nuggets. So, but
probably not good to eat on the air.
Definitely not if you're going to be talking. So I guess I got to start covering a little bit here. So this week I did preach. It was on Gideon out of the Book of Judges. And,
something we don't normally talk about.
No, it's not a book. It's kind of weird, like in the progression of where the Book of Judges falls in terms of what kind of book it is, because it is a historical. So the Old Testament's divided up into like historical writings and prophetic writings and praise writings, right? And so. I'm gonna you're gonna make me keep talking until, and so
I put it away. I cannot eat it.
So this kind of covers a historical writing, but it's also in Jewish, they have a certain arrangement. Their arrangement of the Old Testament, of their testament, I guess, is different than the Christian arrangement of the Old Testament. Just the order of the books. The books are pretty much the same. They're just ordered differently.
Yeah.
And so this falls into like a former prophet book, and so it's not in the prophets, but it's acknowledged sometimes as a prophetic book. So,
well, I've got a lot of questions, things I liked, and some questions for you.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know how we kind of didn't really practice. So.
No, we did not talk at all. Really, kind of walked in and sat down.
I've been gone all week.
You have been, yeah.
But it was fun. I rented a Tesla.
Oh yeah, how'd that go? Yeah.
It was cool. They have a couple things. First of all, Audrey says I'm a very bad driver. I disagree with her, but I found out this week that the Tesla agrees with her because they have some auto drive mode where, like, if you fail 5 times, it turns it off. It turned it off
immediately.
But they also have the screen where you can watch live TV and stuff while you're driving. I know. I watched the sermon. I streamed the sermon live while I was driving out there, watching you on the Tesla screen.
And that's why it turned auto drive off.
I don't know, but yeah,
because I've heard like it watches your eyes,
yeah,
and if they're not on the road,
my eyes are not on the road.
Yeah. And ladies and gentlemen, just think about that. That's with the self-driving car. Think how he is in a regular one.
No, I got to pay more attention in the regular one. But anyways, I loved the way you opened the sermon. In fact, I wrote here, it was real nice. I said, besides ripping off one of my tropes, what inspired you to begin the sermon that way?
It was ripping off one of your tropes. I said, if Steve can do this.
Anyone can use lights.
Yeah, no, it was hard because this was a story that we don't talk about. We don't use this book very often, and I wanted to do I wanted to do something different.
Yeah.
It was an homage to what you did. I'm sure I did not do it justice.
Oh
at
yeah,
all.
you did. You were awesome. You were awesome.
But yeah, it was a way of kind of getting to the part of the story that is really cool.
Yeah.
And without having to say exactly and read directly from the Bible. And so it was a fun way of doing it.
It was neat. It was neat. I was here when you were practicing. It was cool.
Yeah.
Clinton helped a little bit. And it was neat.
Yeah. I didn't do the light thing like we were talking about, but yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I
I know.
That's okay.
I chickened out on that.
I figured, I was like, how are you going to look online in the dark?
Yeah. I chickened out for other reasons. It's fine.
Why?
Though, huh? Well, we talk about the seriousness of being up there, right?
Yeah.
And so my background as not just a teacher and educator, but like is in theater. And so like I know how to, and I worked a lot backstage in lights, and that's why they put me in the booth back there.
That's the reason.
Yeah. That and nobody else. Wait, you touched a soundboard before? You're hired.
I was thinking more like you have a face for the sound booth.
I do actually, and my voice too. I don't know why you let me still talk up on stage.
I'm kidding.
But so I have done a lot of theater, and so I know the tricks.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want it to be a trick. I wanted it to be sincere and real. And I didn't, it's fun to draw people in. It's fun to do that. I struggled with, is it Sunday morning the right time to do it? And so.
Huh.
And we have
What does that say about me?
You and I have that conversation. But see, I'm in charge when it comes to you. I'm in charge, and I'm the one who's saying, "Hey, you really need to do this."
I don't want to use tricks that Steve uses all the time.
But I'm going to make Steve do it because I want him. It's a different perspective.
Okay,
It is. It's
sure.
a different perspective.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, you're more holier than I.
No.
You take it more serious.
I'm just more afraid than you are.
I have no fear. Yeah. I loved how you said obedience doesn't always look bold. Sometimes it looks like a trembling step. And I actually wrote that down. That was really, really clever. And I wondered, where did that line come from?
Gosh, I don't even remember how that line came about. The idea was like, how do we justify him doing what he's doing? He's being obedient, right? Like, so how do we justify him being obedient and like, but doing it kind of in a way that his fear is still so bold and present, and I think there are times that I know there's times where it's like, yeah, I'll do that, but it's like it's hesitant, and it's but the important part is doing that. I think the first time you asked me to preach, it was like, I don't know, like there's and whether that was obedience to God or obedience to you or whatever it was, as you being the pastor at the time and stuff, and it's one of those things I think that we all struggle with is how do we do what we know is the right thing to do, and still live in the fact that we are afraid, that we live in the fact that we are not comfortable with doing something. And so I think it's that, I think that's where I was trying to go with that. I don't know how it became poetic like that, but yeah.
No, that was really good. I thought of all the messages you've given so far, this was the most pastoral. And when you were writing it, did you have any people or situations you had in mind, or? I mean, you probably don't want to share. I mean, if it's personal stuff.
Gosh, I mean, I would say me a lot. I think.
How so?
Well, I think there's that, again, going back to those. There are those times where you're asked to do things, or what the right thing to do is, and you don't want to be there. I've told this story from the pulpit a few times, but my first job teaching, I did not want to be there, and
you and your students had something in common.
Yeah, that's right. That is absolutely correct. It was a really rough job. It was a really rough place to be. And God was really trying to teach me a lesson. And it's one that I learned, I think, very well. I think because what ended up happening is I ended up losing that job for a myriad of reasons. I was there for 4 years, and then they decided to let me go before they gave me tenure. But I tried almost every year to get out. Like year 1, I was trying to get out. Year 2, I was trying to get out. Year 3, I was trying to get out. And year 4, I was not, actually, was the ironic part. And so then when I got my next job, it kind of came out of the blue, came out of nowhere. Like it was, I had told my wife, because I knew I was getting let go, and I told her, I'm like, look, I'm gonna apply until May 30th. And I said, and then I'm done. And then I'll just, if I don't have a job by then, I'll just go and do something else, because I can do whatever.
Yeah.
And I did take one more college class at the master's level to get be able to teach at a college, and so I said, and then I'm going to take that class over the summer, and then if nothing comes, that gives me just another opportunity to do something. And so May 30th came, and I quit putting out applications, and I'd put out a lot up to that point, and they just nothing. It was dead, and so started taking the class in May and June, and sometime like late June, I got a phone call out of the blue randomly that said, hey, we're calling from this school district, and we'd like to interview you for a job. Not a school district I applied to, not a school district that I had even ever heard of before.
Not even a real school district.
Turns out it was actually real. I thought it was fake. I thought someone was pranking me for a minute. And I got the job, and it was a place that I needed to be. That it was a place of healing for me for the first job, number one. But what it made me see is that there's places God needs you to be and wants you to be, like that you are going to have influence in those places, and so I really learned that no matter, I believe that I was there for those 4 years because that was where He needed or wanted me to be, because whatever influence I was having, at the time or at that place. And then when the time came, I ended up going to a different place because that was where I needed to be, and then going to another place because this is where I need to be, and so I think looking at Gideon, he's in a place where he is, and he gets called to a place that he knows he doesn't want to be, but he still goes there anyways and does what he needs to do.
Yeah.
And then he gets called to another place where he doesn't want to be at, but he goes, and this is where he needs to be. And he gets called to another place, and he says, yeah, I'll go. He just does what he's supposed to do. And no matter how much trepidation is in his life, no matter how much fear is in his life, he doesn't stop doing it.
Okay, so how does this work in real life, though? I mean, you gave a great little story there, and it's a real story, but like, we can't get into too much of your personal stuff now, but there's a lot of similarities I feel there. So where do you now stay? Where do you stay content? How do you stay content also being wrestling? Like, okay, this is where God wants me, but also I'm going to be looking for something else because this really isn't where God wants me. Even though He does want, maybe.
Even though He wants me,
I don't
there.
know.
I feel like God's will is always done, right? Like,
then why do we have to do anything?
I think that we are a key player. Like, could God have done everything without Gideon? Yeah, He could have, right? Like, He didn't need to raise up a judge. In fact, that's the ironic part of the book of Judges, and going into the following book after that is that the whole concept is that God's supposed to be the ruler of the people, right?
Yeah.
And they keep calling out for a king. They keep asking for a king. In fact, the end of Gideon we talked about, like, they begged him, be our king, right? So I think that that we're important in God's plan, right? Whether it's through providence or however that looks, So how do you do it? I think you still do what you do, but I think God has the ultimate choice in the end. Like I said, I applied multiple jobs, right?
Right.
Why didn't I get anything? Why didn't I move? Why didn't, it's not that I didn't have an interview or anything, but it didn't happen. And so why? I think God's will is just part of that plan, right? That you do what you do, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing it in the face of God or going against God, his will is going to be done. And sometimes it's hard to discern. Here you have the angel of the Lord comes and tells Gideon, this is what you're going to do, right? God talks to him and says, this is what you're going to do. We don't always get that luxury, I feel like, sometimes.
No.
It's hard to discern. And so I think we have to go about and do our things, but trust that whatever the outcome is God's will in that regard.
Okay.
You didn't like that answer?
No, I thought we'd dance around a little bit. I mean, I don't know, like, how you do, like, I mean, if you're in a situation that you don't want to be in, but...
Yeah, I think that
anybody, and then...
Yeah, but okay, so then the remainder of that question is if you don't get, that removed from that situation, right?
But I guess my question is before then, why even look? Like, if you are where you are... Because you made that conscious effort, like, I don't like where I'm at, I'm going to start looking. And because I don't find anything, then it's God's will that I don't move.
I just trust that it's God's will.
Well, if you trust it's God's will, then why look?
I think because I didn't know the lesson at the time.
Okay.
Right? Okay. So, but I also believe that we have to take action in things, right? I don't think that God asks us to sit down on the sidelines. Because if that's the case, then why do you go to people and talk to them about God? Right. Because otherwise, God.
Well, people don't do that.
I know they don't. In theory, why do you go do that?
Yeah.
And the answer is because if what you're saying is true, and we just simply sit on the park bench and wait for God to bring us the people. I'm not saying that can't happen, but we have to put some stake into the game, right?
Okay. Yeah.
We're told to go, and what does go mean? That's the question that I'm trying to answer, I guess. And so for me, go means, okay, you put out the effort. If God wants you to move on, then you move on. And I know it's not a great answer, but
no, I think it makes sense. I'm not trying to pick on you.
No.
Again, we don't practice this at all.
We don't at all.
I'm just firing questions here. And
it's a fair question because how do you know? How do you discern what God's will is in the end? You know. In fact, one of the story, we're going to weave today, I think. Yeah. And so, the story I skipped over is probably one of the more famous of Gideon's is the story of the fleece.
Yeah.
Right.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. It
like
wasn't
Old Navy fleece or what is that?
Yeah. No, a lamb's fleece. And
what is that?
And like their wool.
Okay.
Yeah. And so Gideon says, look, before he goes to battle the Asherites not the Asherites, the Midians, he's like, I really want to know this is really what you want me to do, right?
Right.
And so he's like, hey, I'm going to put this fleece out. And he's like, and he tells God, like, if this is what you want me to do, I want you just to make the fleece wet and the ground dry with the dew. And so the next morning that happens, and the fleece is soaking wet, and he's able to wring it out into a bowl and everything like that. And then he's like, because he's so afraid, he's like, maybe that was a fluke, And so he's like, all right, if you're really, really wanting me to do this. We're going to do the same thing, but this time I want the fleece dry and I want the ground wet, right? And the idea is if that ground is wet, that fleece has to get wet,
right?
Right. And so the next morning comes and it's dry as a bone, and the ground is wet, and so so there's this idea of where it's at. Well, if you don't put that, and some people look at that story of the fleece as a test of faith. Yeah. And some of them look at it as a test of, I really want to get out of this. And so if this doesn't happen, I'm where I'm at,
No, I think I like that idea of he's a, there's a book by Dan Allender called The Limping Leader, which is one of my favorite books. And it's the idea of that I want leaders who don't want to be leaders, right? Because those are the leaders that are actual leaders, the people that desire leadership, those aren't the leaders I want, because the leaders don't desire leaders.
Yeah, right. If you're ever in a leadership position, it is not a fun place to be.
No, and it's especially in the church. This is where I enjoyed your sermon, and where I also wrestled with was this idea of excellence in performance, like excellence in our skills versus trusting God in our weaknesses. You know what I mean? So like. I think where we get in trouble is where we begin to depend on our own skills, or our own abilities, or our own whatever we bring to the table, and we forget that we have very little to do with this. I mean, God's blessed us, and but at the same time, we also have a responsibility to the skills. But like I think about this with worship folks all the time, because they're putting
a struggle.
Well, it's
Yes.
an unfair advantage because it's an unfair situation because we put them on stage, we put lights on them, we say, hey, we're going to watch you.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to help lead us into singing and into worship. At the same time, you can't be prideful, but we have lights on you and cameras and everybody's looking at you.
Following you and doing all
And you
these
have to be able
things.
to sing on key.
Yeah.
If you can't sing on key, we don't want you up there.
Right.
If you can't sing on beat, no,
Right.
So there's like a skill level there. So how does someone in that position, you know what I'm saying? They have the skill. How do they not allow that to be like, oh, I'm CC Winan, so I can just belt it out.
Right.
But also, like, I need God.
Well,
you know what I mean?
And I think that's the wrestling match, right? Because pride's the hardest
right.
sin, I think, because the moment you're like, well, I'm not prideful anymore,
Right.
you're just showing your pride again,
Right.
And so,
I mean, God hates pride. And I think
God hates
that's why,
pride, right?
Because when we're prideful, it's an idol, right? We put ourselves
Right.
above God, really.
And so I think there's that wrestling, and I think, like, again, God, as Christians, Jesus worked. I went through the onion analogy. We all have our layers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what's the one God's working on?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it is for them. Maybe it's not a contentious issue,
Mm-hmm.
and that's possible because you have people like.
I would disagree. It has to be.
Well, see, and I would go like my other example would be. I don't know how to put this into the podcast. So there's a group of guys who have a web blocker program.
Yeah.
That. You know who I'm talking about? I don't know.
Triple X Church.
Yeah. Okay.
It
I
used
didn't
to
know
be.
where we. Yeah.
No, we can
Okay.
talk
Well,
whatever
that's fine. I didn't know where we wanted to go.
There's a Christian organization that helps fight porn industry.
And so they actually go to porn conventions.
Sure.
And so how are they able to do that and still remain holy and all that,
well,
right?
Yeah.
And so I think there's I'm not saying that goes for everyone, right? Like, I'm just saying there definitely have to be people that are like that, right? Not everyone's like that. You can look at Christian singers, right? You can look at recording artists who have in recent years fallen away, right? And I would say those people maybe didn't have that, or maybe they weren't working on that or whatever. And so
But so how do you work on that? Because again, when you stand up there to speak, people are looking at you. You got to prepare. You have to prepare.
You're right. You do. I don't feel like I'm ever qualified to do it.
Right.
I think that I don't know why. Like, I know I can talk.
Mm-hmm.
I know I can teach. I know stuff. Mm-hmm. Right. But getting up there, I never feel like I'm qualified to be up there.
Mm-hmm.
That's me. I don't. And you might be different.
I think that's a different way to look because I don't know if qualified is the right word because I feel maybe qualified is a good word. I feel skilled to be up there. Like, I know I can communicate and I can do what I do. God's blessed me by His mercy and grit, not by anything I've done.
100%, yeah.
But the qualified is a good part. I'm not any better than anyone else to be up there.
No.
The least of people should be up there. I'm an idiot. And
Yes.
and my prayer is every Sunday, like, God, don't hold my sins against these people. Like, 'cause I know, like, I am a mess and I don't want choices that I've made in my life to.
Mine is let these words be your words.
Yeah,
and really, and every
Sometimes
time
I mess that up and I say, let your words be my words be your words. That's a pride thing.
But that's why, like, I don't, like, I have no business telling these people what to do.
Amen to that. And all the church said amen.
And that's hard too, as being an elder, because, like, you're overseeing these people, and as a pastor elder, you're the same thing. Like,
in one sense. We're not going to go there today. We already talked about porn, so that's not okay. So I do have some questions. So you mentioned not because we get railing here.
I know.
You mentioned that Gideon's story showed God's power and perfect weakness, but that's not how Gideon ends his life. He ends his life leading Israel into idolatry, which is kind of funny because he pulled them out. But so how do you reconcile two sides of his legacy here?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that it was intentional.
Okay.
I don't think he intended it to be an idolatrous object. I don't know what his goal was with it. I mean, because an ephod, like, and I don't know if I mentioned this at all. I can't remember if I said this at all up on the stage, but an ephod in Exodus, which is before this, sorry, not in Exodus, but in one of the books of Moses, is God tells Aaron and the Israelites to create an ephod for Aaron.
Right.
And so it's this breastplate that he wears as a high priest. And so, there's some interesting history out there that ephod still exists somewhere in Ethiopia. There's this whole Ethiopian Christian church idea that when Israel was scattered by Babylon, that a lot of the artifacts ended up in Ethiopia.
Huh.
And so there are these quote unquote churches / areas where no one's allowed in except for the guard, and they guard the ephod and they guard the Ark of the Covenant and all this kind of stuff. And so how does this object become an object of worship?
Yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't. The Bible doesn't explain how. It just says he makes this ephod and he puts it on a statue, and then they start to worship it. And why Gideon, as a judge, doesn't stop that, I don't know.
Yeah.
There's not an explanation for it. It's not a side story.
Well, see, I do think it's a sin though, because in Judges 8:27, Gideon made an ephod of it and put it in his city in Oprah. And all of Israel whored after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his family.
Yeah.
And then later, after Gideon died, again, we're going to get the same...
But what's a snare?
Well, in 33, as soon as Gideon died, the people of Israel turned again and whored after the Baals and made their god. And so I think...
Yeah, so I didn't cover like the aftermath very very much because I think mentioning that the reason why I even got into the ephod and what happened is because I wanted to point out that Gideon wasn't the answer. Right. Even though he's like, yeah, I'm not going to be your king, God's going to be your king, right? Yahweh's going to be your king. He's not the answer, and he's not the answer for us. And so if we're out there looking for Gideon, right, we're looking for someone to rescue us from the moment of problem that we're having, that singular moment. That's not what we should be seeking out, right? So Christ is the answer to all, and he's the eternal answer, right? Yeah. Gideon's a temporary answer. He's a Band-Aid on the problem, and so I wanted, the reason why I included the ephod in that story was because I wanted that transition to show here's a temporary solution, and it's not the solution that we're supposed to be looking for. It sounds great, looks great at the time, but there's problems with it. It's not perfect. And then we have Christ to look to as the perfect solution. He's the one that really does it all in the end. And even though Christ's not the answer in the Old Testament, God is, and it's the same answer. It's just in different forms.
Yeah, I think I like what you're saying there, because I also, as you're talking, I'm thinking it also points to the fact that at this point, Gideon, he shifted from being, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do this, I'm not the guy to do this, to kind of like, maybe I am the guy to do this.
He is, because if you read like that, even though he's like, no, God's going to be, Yahweh will be king over you, right?
Yeah.
If you read the text, it's kind of weird because he starts talking about his sons, and he starts talking about things that are legacies of them. Like, I think at one point he calls one of them a prince, and so like he has this kingdom idea in mind. So it's all grandiose and nice that he says, no, the Lord's going to be your king, but he has this kind of twinge towards maybe I could be the king.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a shift where I see in leaders where I struggle with is that when they begin to believe in their own hype or begin to believe in what they bring to the table, because that's the slippery slope. It is,
and if you look at the churches that have fallen, the big ones, it's
any a
lot of ones, but we hear the big church stories, right? Because there's podcasts out there on them and documentaries on them, right? Yeah. And it's their hubris that is mostly the problem when it comes to that.
Yeah, but I think it even smaller than a big church or as individuals. I think about like people, again, I think of a pastor, I think of a worship leader, I think of people not even working in the churches, people in the regular lives, that the moment they begin to believe the hype that they're something great.
For sure.
Again, not that you don't have value, not that you don't have worth, not that God has blessed you, and by all means, but that realizing that it all comes from him and not from us.
And I think that's part, again, we use, you and I use this verse a lot with each other about dying to oneself, right? Yeah. And so what does that look like? And part of that is, sure, you can be, I'm going to go with Bob and Lisa. I appreciate what Bob and Lisa did.
Yeah,
and it's
me
great.
too. Well,
And
I appreciate it more because I actually used it for us, but that's okay.
And it's great to be acknowledged. But then you also have to go on the other side of that and say that's not necessary. Right?
No.
It's not. My worth is not defined by. And I think that's where the joke always comes in for me, at least, is the two of them that are listening to us right here on this podcast, is that it's not. This is just. My goal was, how do we get more out there?
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
How do we?
Chris's goal was, how do I spend more time with Steve? And Steve's goal is, how do I spend less time with Chris?
And that's fair. I think that's easy.
Do you see the conundrum we are in?
And that's why we're only at 45 minutes.
We're already at 45 minutes?
No.
Oh,
on
man.
our podcast. All right, go ahead.
Yeah.
What else you got?
Okay. Okay. So I don't know where you're going to go with what didn't make the sermon. So
okay.
I've got three little things here. First of all, I love that you brought in Paul's thorn in the flesh.
Yeah.
Because that's a cool story unto its own. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think that thorn was? Do you have thoughts on that? 'Cause I have some thoughts. But
So, I mean, in a lot of the commentary, nobody knows, first of all.
Yeah.
Like, we just put out there. So anything we say is 100% speculation.
yeah.
So a few of the things I've ever read is his eyesight
Yeah.
is a big one that's usually put out there. And so he can't see very well, and that's a down to him because he needs to write, he needs to read letters and all that kind of stuff. I've heard sexual sin, as far as that. I don't know what it is. Like,
Sure.
It's something that he feels makes him weaker to his calling.
Yeah.
Initially, right?
Yeah.
Until he's told otherwise.
Yeah. See, I think it's eyesight, and I think of that for a couple of reasons. First of all, when he first sees Jesus, he goes blind, right?
Yeah,
So there's
bro,
a moment
yeah,
of poof. And then he's told, Simon's told that, tell him how much he's going to suffer for me. So the scales fall off. And I wonder if in that process, if something happened with eyesight. And I only say that because he'll often end his letters with, see, I write this in my own hands. Look how big I write my name. Again,
okay, yeah.
But more so in Galatians chapter 4, verse 12, he says, he's writing to the church in Galatia, brothers, I entreat you, become as I am, for I also have become as you are. You did me no wrong. You know it was because of a bodily ailment that I preached the gospel to you at first. And though my condition was a trial to you, you did not scorn or despise me, but received me as an angel of God, as Christ Jesus. What then has become of your blessedness? For I testify to you that if possible, you would have gouged out your eyes and given them to me. And so when I read that, I think of, like, this church was so willing to give them their eyes so he could see. And again, speculation and all that.
It is. And
whatever it is, though, he says, I've asked God 3 times to remove this.
right.
And similar to your job situation, I've asked God to get me out of here.
Right.
And 3 times he said, no,
Right.
because in your weakness is where I find your strength.
Yeah,
and I think that, I mean, especially with Paul, who is a type A, highly educated,
for sure, yeah.
Go,
Yeah.
super smart, read, write, all that stuff. That pride is right on the other side of that. To think that, listen, this is what I could bring to
For
this.
sure. Remember when he lists out, I'm of this, I'm of this, I'm of this, I'm of this, right? Like, you have to feel like even though he's like, I'm of this, I'm not, and so yeah, that he knows sitting out there that's the problem. I think he always also has his persecution as a weight around his neck.
Yeah,
the fact that he persecuted early Christians, and there's some that even say that he was there at Stephen's.
Oh yeah, well, it says the Bible says that.
Yeah, and so
not some.
Well.
Rumor has it.
I guess
according to
the
Acts.
some is did he participate or not is
Well,
the
yeah, he
question,
condoned it.
right?
I
He
mean,
condoned it,
oversaw
though,
it.
and I think he feels remorse and guilt for that.
Yeah.
Totally.
We said this a lot. I envision him going to cities and having family members come up and say, you oversaw my dad going to jail, or you took my family away, or you destroyed my family. I mean, have him having to reconcile with that, Okay, another thing is that you wrote, it turned worship into manipulation, community into corruption. It traded the covenant for convenience. And I just asked, how do you think the church today is still tempted to trade covenant for convenience like Israel did with Baal?
I actually wrote that with the church in mind.
Oh, really? Okay, so how so?
I think Baal worship in the old days is no different than what we do today.
How
right?
so? What do you mean?
Well, I think we again, it's going back and relying on ourselves and not relying on God, right? Because Baal is nothing, right? Like, but they relied upon him. So what do? We rely on the fact that we go out and we what's the Lord's Prayer? Give us this day our daily bread, right? We don't worry about daily bread anymore, right? What do we rely on ourselves to make the money, to build the house, to buy the food, to have the entertainment, like the entertainment that that we seek out so readily in this. And I'm guilty of it just as much as anyone else, right?
Sure.
Like it's not like I sit without a television in my house or I don't listen to podcasts or anything like that. Like, but we've traded this culture of reliance on God and knowing and trusting in what He's able to do for us, and turned it into going after whatever makes us happy. I mean, and it's not all of us, right? This is a huge generalization.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's the world we live in, right? How do I pursue happiness? How do I pursue what I want, what I need? And trust me, as an educator, it's there. It's prevalent from the kids on up to the adults.
Yeah. So how is the church tempted to do that?
I think the church, because we live in the world, and like Paul says,
I'm saying like actual ways though.
Oh,
You said,
ways that we do it. I think we okay. I don't want to go into this one, but I think
we'll edit it and post.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
I don't know if we're even recording, honestly. I know we're recording here, but the whole sermon, the whole podcast, I'm like, I hope I hit the record button on the camera.
Every single time. I forgot to ask you before we actually started.
I don't know if you used earlier too. I got trapped up in my headphone cord, and I was like,
I saw that. You dropped your thing.
So I hope we're not recording.
This one may not look beautiful, folks. I think we show it a lot. I think because in the church, like, I know for us, I don't know what every church is like out there, but I know on a Sunday, especially during springtime, summertime, and fall time, you have people who they put sports over us.
Well, not just sport. I think
or summer activities or whatever. I think there is definitely that component where, and it's not saying don't take a vacation, don't it's okay. I think it's okay to miss a Sunday. Every once in a while, right? But the statistics show that they're coming once every 5 Sundays nowadays. It used to be 4, like a handful of years ago. Now it's 5. I think is the stat. It's that it's taking and we make it convenient because we put things online and all that kind of stuff. But looking at the views, they're not watching that either. They're not coming. They're not coming to that. There's the idea of who do we trust with our money? Is it that we don't trust ourselves with our money? Do we trust God with our money? And how do we show that? And so I think in terms of tithing is a faith step, and I think that it's a struggle, and it's hard for people to realize that because we get so tied down to our money because it's a safety net for us. Right? Because if I don't have money, I can't live in my house.
Right. Well, how is that trading covenant for convenience though?
Because the covenant is that Christ has forgiven us of our sins and that he's going to take care of us, right?
Okay.
All right. And so what's the convenience is, well, I could just do it myself, quicker and faster and easier.
Okay.
Right.
So my last question then is, would you preach this message differently if you were speaking to leaders versus new believers? Or how would you preach it differently? Or maybe you wouldn't, I don't know. Maybe it's a dumb question.
Well, yeah, I think it's easy to say if you're talking to Christian leaders, like obviously you're going to curtail it a little bit differently because we're going to focus more on the leadership aspect. And we probably I'd probably dig more instead of going into the whole, like, I'd probably say, we need Jesus. I think that's a generalized message for a widespread audience, right? I think if we're talking specifically to leaders, I think going more into chapter 8 and talking more about what's the outcome, because I think, like you said, it's easy for leaders to fall into that idea of pride and hubris and all that's there. And so chapter 8 really teaches that lesson of, like, everything's kind of the setup. For a leader, everything else is a setup. Like, oh, I'm reluctant, I'm afraid, I'm this, but I follow through and I do what I need to do. But then chapter 8 shows what happens when we start to fall into ourselves and not rely on God for those things.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think if I were to do it, it would be ABL, always be learning. Like, I think as a leader, you have to have this posture of always, you don't know it all. And I know you think you know it all. I know you're gifted and you're skilled and God has blessed you, but honestly, that all comes from him. And at any moment, that can go away.
And only because we're on the podcast, I'm going to tell you, like, I've been part of this church for my entire life. And, even still, like I wanted to understand baptism. Like I'm doing a deep dive into baptism. Yeah. There's other things that you and I have talked about that that you and I are deep diving in.
Let's do it. Let's talk about it right now. Women in leadership. Let's go.
It's a deep dive conversation, right? Like, and so we kind of came across this separately on our own. But it's. You have to kind of always be challenged. I think goes back to that work out your faith with fear and trembling, right?
Yeah.
And so if I realize I don't understand, and I know that I'm not going to understand it all, there are things I'm like, I just have to have faith and trust God on. The Trinity is one of those things.
Yeah.
You'll never hear me talk about it because I don't know that I can ever talk about it without committing heresy.
Yeah.
So.
All right. So we've talked now for about 40 minutes.
We have.
And you have not gotten to what didn't make the sermon.
That's true. But we touched on a handful of things. There were a couple of really fun things that I left out. So names are important in the Bible, right? And they have meaning. And so Gideon's name has a meaning. It means chopper or hewer or one who cuts down. And so this is really, I love this part of the story that kind of gets left out. And so Gideon, what's his first mission?
Right.
His first mission is to go tear down the Baal altar, but also to chop down the Asherah pole.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's he do is he goes and chops that down. Now, what I left out of that story is the next morning, and all the townspeople are like, he needs to be killed essentially for doing this, right? And so Gideon's father steps out, and for whatever reason, we don't know the background of his father Joash very much, but he defends Gideon, even though this is his altar, and he says, "Look, if Baal's a god, then let him contend for himself. Let him take out the punishment on Gideon at that point." And so Gideon then earns the name Jerubbaal, which means let Baal contend against him. And so the interesting part is so in the beginning you have the story of Gideon. For a brief moment, once he gets this new name, he gets referred to as Jerubbaal. There's a point where he's referred to as both Gideon and Jerubbaal. When the fight in the battle against the Midianites happened, he's referred to only as Gideon. But then after, he's referred to as Jerubbaal. And so what's the meaning here? So here we have chopper, right? He's doing God's work, right? He chops down the Asherah pole. He chops down the Midianites, right?
Right.
And then we get to this idol worship, and we're back to being referred to now as Jerubbaal. And so let Baal contend against him. It's just kind of a really interesting turn of names and everything like that, because names are very important in there. Another thing I left out was there's a story where as he's chasing down the armies, he asks for help, and these towns say nope. And you haven't done anything yet, essentially. So he wants to feed and water his men, and they're like, we're not going to help you because they're still the leaders at this point. And so he comes back and kills them after he defeats them. He's like, you had your opportunity. He takes the leaders and does bad to them, which is, I think, a turning point for him in all reality, right?
Yeah.
He's taking out his anger and vengeance on it. And, and so there's an issue. And I think that's the creeping into that pride, that's his downfall at the end.
Yeah.
I love the, this is a fun one too. So later, I think it's in August maybe, or end of July, one of my sermons is going to be on Elijah. And Elijah, the main story that we're going to talk about is the what's usually referred to as the battle between Elijah and the priest of Baal. But really, it's the battle of Yahweh and Baal.
Come on, yeah.
And what do we have here? The battle of Yahweh and Baal.
Yeah,
this is this is the opening title card for something that's going to happen later, and it's sad because, gosh, we had this how long before we have this, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just that never ending thing, and that's where I think we're still at. We're still battling Yahweh versus Baal. We just don't refer to it as that anymore. It's Yahweh versus the culture of America at this point. what else did I have? Couple other things. Angel of God. We don't have to go into this very deeply, but I found it interesting in my research that there is no word really for messenger in ancient Hebrew. And so the word angel is actually a Greek word that means messenger. And so again, because we do this for fun, it's fun to kind of think about, well, is this really what we refer to as an angel, right? Or is this a messenger? And so it's interesting because Gideon, I said, breaks a little bit from the formula of Judges where God sends a prophet, right? And so there's some discussion of, is this angel of God a prophet? And the other thing is, this is like one of the first mentions of a prophet in the Bible. Deborah in the story before in chapter 5 is referred to as a prophetess, and it's believed because of the song that she wrote and everything. But this is the first true mention of a prophet almost in the Bible. And so it's kind of interesting that is this messenger of God, and we can go into depths of what messengers of God look like. And it's not saying it can't be an angelic being, a heavenly host, if you will, but there's debate and question about who this individual is and what they are, and just to understand that sometimes when we do see that phrase angel of God, it's not always in reference to being an actual angel. Sometimes it can be a messenger, and sometimes it is an angel. It just depends on the situation.
That's cool.
And then the last thing was,
hey,
come on.
We're already at 50 minutes.
Yeah, well, you went long too.
I can go long. I had a lot of questions.
So one of the things I didn't really hit on and talk about was, and I had Daniel read my sermon beforehand because I just wanted to make sure it flowed well.
Yeah.
And so I know sometimes we share with each other just to check each other's work. And so he put out there and he asked the question, because I used the word faith and I used the word obedience.
Yeah.
And he wanted to know should I lean into obedience more or should I lean in more into faith? And so it got me to thinking what's the relationship between the two? And does one have to come before the other?
Yeah.
And so as I kind of like dug through that a little bit, I kind of came down to the idea that faith usually has to come first.
Okay.
It's not always the case. So this is another individual that we've talked about that he's in that Hebrews 11.
Yeah.
Hebrews 11:32, by faith Gideon.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think because he was so afraid that he had to have faith. And so every single moment where he does a test, that brings his faith a little bit stronger. And that stronger faith allows him to obey. Now, I'm not saying that that's always the case. I think sometimes obedience does come before faith, but I think that's the rare case. If we go back to Noah's told to build the ark, right? And then he builds the ark, right?
Yeah.
Abraham obeyed when he was called, right? So there's this idea of that. And so James, we've hit this verse a few times, but faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead, right? And so I think that's one of those ideas of how do we marry these two together? I think they're inseparable, right? I think, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the only book I've ever read of his and is powerful is The Cost of Discipleship, and he writes this line in there. He says, "Only he who believes is obedient, and only he who is obedient believes." And so, when we start to look at this and talk about it, it's that idea of what do we do? They're both reflective of trust. They're both, their obedience will strengthen your faith, right? So when Gideon does his chopping down of the ash pole and the destruction of the Baal, his faith is stronger. I mean, it's great. He starts off with nothing, right? And it's kind of fun because what's Christ tell us? If you have the faith of a mustard seed, right? Yeah. And I think, and if you don't know anything, mustard seeds are these itty bitty teeny tiny seeds. And so what does he do is he starts off with that faith of mustard seed. It doesn't grow very big, but it grows a little bit. Yeah. And he tests God again and it grows bigger. And then I think it gets big enough because when he goes down to the Midian camp and he's like, here's this dream, it's like suddenly the light switch is turned on him.
Yeah.
And I honestly believe his fear is 100% taken away at that point.
Yeah.
Because how else does he go back? First of all, he worships fully at that point. You know, like the first time he's really confronted with God, he's afraid of dying.
Yeah.
And so when God tells him no peace, you're going to live through this, right? He builds an altar at that point. That's another thing I left out. He built an altar there. He literally calls it Yahweh Shalom, which means the Lord is peace.
Yeah.
And so he has these faith moments that he goes along with. It just gets bigger and bigger, but it's through the obedience that I think it grows.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's what I had. So.
All right. Well, now it's time for everybody's favorite segment. The Melchizedek moment. Hold on, we got an intro song. While we play this, I'm gonna make sure the camera is recording.
Otherwise, we have to redo this whole thing.
No way.
In the ancient scrolls, a name appears so sleek. Melchizedek, the priest and king, so unique.
Good news, we are recording.
No father, no mother, no beginning, no end. A mystery wrapped.
Okay, so today's Melchizedek moment is what?
So I think the idea of obedience comes into this as well. And so, you know, we talked about it a little bit, I think, last time, but Abraham, when he first meets Melchizedek, he ties to him a tenth of all of his spoils of war.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this idea that there are some that, and again, if we want to go with this being a Christophany, which whether you believe that or not, I think it's fun too. I don't know that I'm sold 100% on it, but that God is so there, like so big, and it's like you're just compelled, you know. And so I think that idea of obedience is that when you really are being exposed fully to God, like there's just this compulsion to do certain things.
Yeah.
And so I think that you know, Abraham's tithe is a huge witness to that compulsion to do things for God and for the Lord. And
That's
so,
cool. That's
yeah.
cool.
So.
I think you're struggling to find Melchizedek
No,
moments.
I think I actually didn't prepare my Melchizedek moment because I was going to go into Hebrews and I forgot to go read Hebrews. So
That's okay. No big deal. It's just a podcast we do every week.
I was prepping on the other stuff because I always know what's Steve going to ask me.
Yeah. Okay. So before we close out and talk about next week, we got a letter.
Ooh,
No, I got a text message.
will you just go? Can we
Yeah,
do the
from-
Blue's Clues?
We can't. We'll get
Okay.
copyright strike. This was from Lori. She said, "Catching up on the podcast. Please don't change the way you deliver your sermon. LOL. There's no reason you should try to talk like someone else. God picked you for this role, and you are doing it the way He made you. And Chris is doing it the way He made Chris. It's good that you're not the same." Oh, that was a good word.
I do. I think I don't know that it's changing because of you or because of me. I think it's just understanding that there are different ways to deliver, and different people receive messages different. And so
It was very kind. I really appreciate it.
I do appreciate that.
Yeah.
But yeah. Don't. I'm not trying to follow in Steve's footprints.
That was more for
promise you.
me doing for you, I think. 'Cause
Was
I
it?
think I was complaining about how I talk too fast. I need to slow down.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Because I felt like this week I kind of followed in your footsteps a little bit. So
I had to listen to you at 1.25 speeds. You are so slow when you talk. I'm like, speed that thing up. I listened to it the second time on the way home, and I'm like, 1.25.
and that's my one of my weird quirks is like most people when they get up in front of people they talk fast.
Chris
and
slows
I don't know
down.
why, but I can slow it down.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so
Like this podcast.
Yep.
All right. All right. Upcoming week. We got an interesting week this week because there will be no sermon. The sermon will be in our bodies as we go out and be the church.
Yeah.
Love Lincoln Way. And so I think what we're talking about doing is potentially recording a fun episode, maybe Sunday afterwards with some people that participated and talking a little bit about Love Lincoln Way and maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know what I honestly don't know what
we're
doing.
working it out, but it was an idea we came up before we started this
Yeah,
one.
Chris
So
came
that's
up
what
with-
I was giving you credit too.
I appreciate that. I had no idea that this was happening. I'm going to be on vacation next week, so we're going to record it Sunday, hopefully. Yeah. But I'm excited.
I am too. So
And then we'll talk about next week. So
yeah, that's
and we're
fair.
sorry this came out a day late, but I was traveling and I was traveling, so it's my fault.
Steve got in late, and I would rather have him been fresh than
Smelly.
yeah.
Yep.
So
All
all right. Well, I appreciate. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to recommend us to your friends.
And what do you got to do that like button?
You got to smash that like button and hit subscribe.
See y'all.
See ya.
It's Chris and Steve with the mic in hand, digging through truths that don't quite land. The bits and pieces that didn't get said, from the pulpit to the podcast instead. Not for Sunday mornings, no halos here. We're breaking it down with a laugh and a cheer. Knowledge nuggets flying wild and free. Welcome to the chaos, grab your coffee. Dives into the things we missed, a little offbeat with a thoughtful twist. From ancient scrolls to the latest scene, unpacking the threads that weave between. Not for Sunday mornings, no halos here. We're breaking it down with a laugh and a cheer. Knowledge nuggets flying wild and free. Welcome to the chaos, grab your coffee. Chatter, leave the pews behind. Unpolished truths for the curious mind. We're off the script and off the rails, where the untold story never fails. No, come. Not for Sunday mornings, no halos here. We're breaking it down with a laugh and a cheer. Knowledge nuggets flying wild